Welcome back to Someday in Science. I'm here today with Kevin McMullen, dermatologist, but also host of the Giraffe Problem on Substack. And that's how we kind of ran across each other. Giraffe Problem tackles some of these wacky questions about the nature of life, not only on Earth, but in the universe, through deep time and well into the future. The fundamentals of physics and biology and what that means in terms of how we ended up as we are, how giraffes ended up as they are, and everything in between. So, Kevin, thanks for joining me today. I've just got 150,000 questions I'm looking forward to diving into.
Great.
Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so glad we were able to connect on Substack, and I'm just thrilled to be here and chat with you today. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's so let's start with the fact that you're a dermatologist who writes about giraffes. How did you get to this point? And, in talking to you before the call, it's a winding path, but you bring to it a lot of external knowledge. So give us a little bit of context here for how you started writing about what you write and the types of things, the types of questions you try to answer.
Sure. I think I started out as one of those people who got to college and didn't quite know what they wanted to do. I was into science. I was into chemistry, physics, biology, all of it. And I did a real deep dive when I was an undergrad, but I got towards the end. I said, well, what the heck do I want to do with my life? And it felt like I either go into a lab and get a PhD or I go out and become a doctor. I didn't really understand what career paths were available to me. Um, but as time went on, I realized just how interested in evolution in general I was. And as I went through medical school, I couldn't help but synthesize these ideas in the context of broader questions about how did life get to be what it is? How does life interact with the physical laws of the universe? And how might those be applied elsewhere? And so now, as a fully fledged dermatologist who wound up terminally differentiated in a very specific field, I'm looking at my life and the world around me and thinking, well, how do I reapply that? How do I revisit these ideas that got me so excited about science in the first place? And how might I be able to share them with other people?
So then we get to the topics that you tend to cover. So, for example, one of the pieces you recently did was on a molecule that is a pheromone.
Mhm.
Elephants use it to attract other elephants. And the wacky thing about it wasn't even that. It was that the exact same molecule, no differences, are what moths, certain type of moth, uses to attract other moths. And the fact that these completely different critters are using this exact same physical chemical to do this wacky emotional thing. And what that means in terms of chemistry, but also biology and life and similarities and all this stuff. So, how do you, first of all, I guess, dive into that just real quick and give us
Sure.
some context for how that even works? And then, how do you find topics like that and decide to dive into them?
Yeah, that was a really jaw-dropping factoid that I bumped into. Actually, it was kind of mentioned in passing in Ed Yong's An Immense Universe, or An Immense World, I think, that both moths and elephants use the same exact molecule, not a different handedness, not a different version of it, but the exact chemical structure to do the exact same thing. And what it actually tells us is that of all the possible molecules that could exist in the universe, there are only so many that are able to slowly vaporize off of a surface and then linger in the atmosphere long enough for some other organism to come along that happens to have receptors that are capable of attaching to that molecule in the first place. The suite of possibilities gets smaller and smaller and smaller when you start adding all of these constraints together. And then when you really start looking at it, there are only a few, maybe a few 100,000 molecules, or maybe even less than that, that are even possible to choose as signaling molecules. And the rest is just probably an accident, but maybe there's something more to it. But that's really what that article is about, and that essay was about, was something that feels like it should be impossibly infinite actually turns out to be a lot more constrained than we may imagine. Now let's just think about, well, if that's true here on Earth, what other those same constraints are going to be true on other planets as well, and you can expand that thinking much farther than you might imagine.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that it underpins a lot of your work is that this is also a toe dip into science fiction and kind of wondering what might be on, well, not even science fiction, but science of what might be on other planets, but also spurs up the imagination to get into the science fiction of what could be, based on just these fundamental rules that you're running across. So let's get back then to dermatology because
Sure.
I talk about dermatology with some laughter in my voice, only because dermatology doesn't get enough credit for the science that it is. It's looked at like, is this cancer? And I'm at a dinner party. Is this cancer? And
Yeah.
then the reality is that there's so much science going on, not only in terms of what you do in your practice, but in what skin is, and what it has become, and what it means to have skin or a barrier or any of those things. And so let's wrap back into sort of the dermatology side of the equation, which is, it's your academic background. But how do you now, with your exploration of everything, you've kind of tuned your vision back to your academic background and mixed it in with all the things you've observed and seen. How do you look at skin now, and in this context of this biological construct that evolved over a gajillion years, that every organism kind of shares in a certain way? Where does skin start?
Great question. So you're asking a dermatologist, and I'm going to give you a very partial answer here. I have skin in the game, let's say.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I can't help it. I'm sorry. I have a toddler here at home. Um, but skin is, in my opinion, the most vital organ, and it was the first organ that there was, both in terms of single celled life, but in terms of multicellular life as well. It is actually definitional to the idea of life, at least here on Earth, to have a barrier between what is alive and what is not alive. And as you look at the way life has changed throughout the history of time, it really starts with the interface between the living and the rest of the environment. Um, you can look at early multicellularity. You can look at the way friction acts on a larger organism as it pushes through the mud or bumps up against a rock, whatever it is, all the way up to today, where our skin is a sensory organ. It's an organ of communication. It's an organ that shows us a window into the inside of ourselves. It does heat regulation. It protects us from ultraviolet radiation. There are all these different functions of skin as it is today that echo the past. But really, when you look at the first cell, the skin did what every organ does. It was all the organs put together. It did gas exchange. It served as a gut lining. It maintained gradients. It did detoxification. It did what your liver, kidneys, lungs, heart, everything did. It's all wrapped into the skin.
So flesh that out for, the earliest points. You're
Mhm.
talking about skin and the concept of being a barrier. So
Yeah.
it's almost like, when we think of cells now, we think of them as usually we think of them as a piece of a larger thing, sometimes as a unicellular organism that's all
Mhm.
on its own. So if you think about it as the unicellular organism, a single cell organism floating around, the skin is basically the wall of that cell, is the concept here, right? It's
Correct. I'm using the word skin very loosely, and I'm probably going to be doing that throughout this conversation. When you're thinking of it in a deep evolutionary context, what we're really doing is talking about the outer limit of an organism's ability to control the matter within it. And so I think
and
of
to block the matter without,
and
correct?
to keep the other matter out. Yeah, and so it's really about this idea of an interface. And when I think of skin in a like non-dermatologist concept, but a broader concept, really what I'm thinking of is an interface both between living and non-living, but also within an organism. Compartmentalization in general.
Yeah, because without these barriers, everything mushes together and things get messy very quickly.
A big
So,
organism needs organization, one way or the other.
yeah. So when you start then looking at skin at that earliest point as just a membrane around a cell, and then you
Hmm.
get to multicellular organism, you get to something that's still a simple critter, but it's got lots of different types of cells within.
Hmm.
And those that you have both a border between cells and a border around the organism in a sense.
Hmm.
Then you start getting to that border doing other things that besides just separating, besides just keeping outside out and inside in. So what was that stage of when things evolved from, okay, we're just simply a barrier. It might be doing some cool magic like gas exchange or whatever, but
Yeah.
now it's actually got functional properties. What was happening at that earliest element?
Muscles. It was when muscles really came along. It basically in the Ediacaran period, heading into the Cambrian explosion, what happened was neuromuscular systems started to develop in early multicellular life that allowed organisms to move against gravity and move against other surfaces. And so shear forces, friction, started to play a larger role than they did before. Previously, it was a lot about ion gradients, it was about osmotic forces, it
Stuff
was
floating around. You're basically a
stuff like
jellyfish floating around.
exactly. A cell floating around doesn't fall and splat on a rock because it's so close to what the water is around it. If it falls, it goes so slowly, bounces off the ground, or it's stuck to the rock or whatever it is, it doesn't feel those forces. When skin really became skin and needed to become skin was when lots of cells could contract all at once and move real mass over distance. An actual organism could scrape against something for the first time, and that required an outer coating so the thing didn't just fall apart.
So I always think about evolution in terms of the accidental part of it. It tends to get described in science communication and elsewhere as something that almost has its own mind. Like, the human body, the arm evolved to do this, like as if the arm was thinking, I want to do this and I'm going to evolve that way. But the reality is these are accidents on top of accidents on top of accidents, and certain things stand out and survive. And so when you have something like not falling apart, that's a big accident. So is it that there were some organisms that just they because of the way that the cells on the outside, what became sort of their skin, that their durability meant that when they randomly did hit something, they didn't fall apart. That was their survival plus. Is it that kind of concept?
Exactly. I mean, the first organisms that we're talking about are actually poorly preserved in the fossil record. We're talking before there was something called bilateral symmetry, like when a worm can go, it knows the difference between forward, backward, up, down, and left and right. It can go. We're talking even before that, when all you had was basically, I wore a jellyfish shirt for a reason, jellyfish, kind of undulating and becoming big enough to become filter feeders where their tentacles were bringing in other microorganisms. When a jellyfish gets smashed into a rock by a wave, it can't fall apart. That's the only way to survive is to develop some kind of outer rind that prevents you from falling apart when you crash into something. And
This
so is
just
I'm
that
sorry,
this is another good point is that jellyfish are still here. So even
we
the
have them.
randomness that led to skin developing
Mhm.
didn't mean that not every jellyfish hit a rock. That some jellyfish are still,
That's right.
you know,
The jellyfish that survived were the ones that didn't fall apart when they hit rocks. And when you look at the outer layer of a jellyfish, they have a very simple what we call an epithelial lining, which is just a layer of cells that are a little bit tougher and meant to interface with the outside world. It's the simplest thing that we have on Earth today that we could really call skin in a multicellular organism.
so that's actually okay.
Someone
So
might
that's
fact check
actually
me on that, but that's pretty
yeah.
close
Well,
to
that's what the
accurate.
comment section are for. I always say I
Yeah,
hope that we get stuff wrong so people leave comments
yeah,
and drive some conversation here. But that's actually the opposite of what I was thinking. So it's the jellyfish did develop some sort of skin, and that's why they persist. But I imagine there's also some of the organisms that didn't form a skin that still survive just because of the random nature of that there's a lot of space in the ocean and that they didn't all get destroyed. And
sure.
those though that had a skin had an advantage and were able to actually multiply in a much more significant way.
Correct. Yeah, there are certainly still like transitional organisms. A great example would be sponges. So sponges are as far as we can tell, the very first organisms that we could call animals or that we classify as animals. And they typically are more like collections of cells that work together. They don't really have mouths or butts or front, back, left, right. Some do now, but they were more like collectives with specialized tissues. And because they were not mobile really, they didn't develop much of an outer shell or an epithelial lining. Some do, but it's very, very simple and not something that we could really call an organ in the traditional sense. And so we're very lucky that, I mean, it's true that a lot of life forms are gone, but a lot of life forms still stick around that can kind of show us how things evolved over time. But yeah, there are certainly animals that are simpler than jellyfish that do kind of fall apart, um, but they don't have muscles.
Yeah. And so the muscles, did they evolve first to give direction to motion, and then the skin sort of was a result of having to protect this organism, that it just that the ones that ended up accidentally developing shells and whatnots, those became the more successful?
We have no idea.
Well, that's true, we don't.
It's a chicken or the egg, really. I
Yeah.
mean, it's one of these things where I've thought about it this way, that life tends to push itself into new niches. It will often discover new ways of being. And the skin evolves, helps life evolve into a new niche in the first place. And in this case, what we're talking about is life being able to become big enough to respond to gravity in the first place, life being able to push through mud, and a worm being able to go and say, hey, there's food over here, or there's a mate over here, or I should run that way, and be able to move all these cells, a big clump of matter, all moving at the same time. That was something that wasn't possible before. And it was only possible as muscles developed, but also as skin evolved to allow it to enter this new niche and to discover a world of the macroscopic,
And then once you get to the macroscopic, things kind of explode. So
the
skin,
Cambrian.
yeah. So you get to the Cambrian, everything's all these forms, a lot of which we now still see today.
Mhm.
Um, we're talking, I guess, about 500 million years ago, and all of that, it boggles the mind to think about the things we will never know about because the fossil record is so incomplete.
Yeah.
But there is so much, so many wacky little critters and things. What are some of the features that skin has kind of taken on between then and now? Things that we think of skin as being so familiar. Skin is a cultural word as much as even more so than a scientific one. And I want to get to the emotional elements of it, and what you talk about as being sort of the visual element of it in a second. But before we get to that sort of metaphysical side of things,
Mhm.
just in terms of functionality, what is it that the skin developed in terms of functions that it brought to the table?
Sure, and this is where a great extension of that niche conversation that we were just talking about. Um, a lot of aquatic animals, fish, mollusks, anything that really swims, tends to select for like streamlinability, tends to select for a little bit of armor sometimes, but really it's about motion, slipperiness, mucous membranes, things of that nature. Um, Arthropods did it completely differently. So you look at crabs and lobsters; they were basically defensive organisms, we think, to defend against things like teeth and claws and chompers and whatever the case may be. But you find crustaceans often living among rocks in little crevices, whatever the case is. Obviously, tell me all about krill, guys. Yeah. There are plenty that live in open ocean, but you get these different approaches to interfacing with the outside world. You get scales, you get like little bony bits that are on the outside of sharks. You look at something like an octopus, and then you start seeing real early and complicated coevolution with eyeballs. And so you get these chromophores and iridophores in the skin of octopi and cuttlefish that can immediately change color and change pattern, little muscles in the skin that will contract to give it different shapes and different appearances to help aid it, against predation.
Well,
And
let's pause on
yeah,
that a
sure.
bit because chromatophores and all of that, that deserves some time. Because you're talking about, maybe you can start the conversation a little bit about the visual side
Yeah.
and the coevolution with sight. But then at the same time, what it takes in terms of the mind to understand the environment you're in, how to control your skin to blend in with your environment, those sorts of things. So dig into the chromatophores a little bit.
Oh, this is fascinating and very poorly understood right now. It's the most amazing part about that to me is that first of all, octopi evolved, or cephalopods in general evolved a camera-based eye that is very much like the human eye, except they don't have three different cones. They only have one. They see black and white. And yet an octopus will land on something that's multicolored and recapitulate those colors in its skin.
So we don't know how it's detecting those colors that its eyes are not.
We know that the skin itself has photoreceptors in it. And the thought is the skin of the octopus might have some kind of color sensitive receptor that interprets the light around it and then allows it to change its chromatophores to match the environment, even though the octopus itself, as far as we can tell, can't see color. It may be that we haven't discovered its color vision in its eyeball yet, or it may be that the skin itself is actually detecting the color.
Or is it that the skin is somehow transmitting information to the mind that it's able to interpret? Because you have to
Yeah.
wonder
Is it
how it's
connected?
seeing the textures, seeing behind its head, so to speak. I mean, to be able to make those decisions and changes.
Yeah, and and then the cognitive aspect of cephalopods is also very poorly understood and fascinating. It appears that an octopus has 8 brains around on each one on each arm, and then it has a central mind, and they seem to kind of swap who's in charge every once in a while. The arms are kind of doing their own thing. The central brain is maybe receiving some information from them, not particularly directing them as far as we can tell. But then if you sneak up behind and clap your hands, the whole thing just shoots off. So like the central can override the peripheral. But
Plus, the
we don't
central's doing strategic thought. The central, I mean, if it's trying to escape, they're so good at escaping
yeah,
from zoos. There's clearly a coordinating process there. So that, in
yeah,
terms of just understanding the mind, is kind of a crazy leap because we always think of the mind in a almost a linear, as big as our thoughts get. Particularly you and me, when we get on a call and our thoughts go everywhere,
yeah.
it's still kind of linear. But when you're talking about potentially having multiple thoughts happening at the same time in different places in an organism, and somehow they coordinate
In a way that we can't comprehend.
in a
Yeah,
way that we can't comprehend.
I am no expert on like cephalopod cognition. I am a lowly dermatologist, but everything that I've read about this, it appears that there is a distributed consciousness and a central consciousness that are not always talking to one another, but can be overridden bidirectionally. And it's one of those things. It's like that classic essay, like what it's like to be a bat. We can't know. And in this case, what that octopus is experiencing is beyond our ability to really understand. And you're right, the skin might be telling the brain, like, these are the colors that I'm experiencing, change, or it may be that the brain is saying to the skin, I need to hide, do what you need to do. And somebody who studies this better may know more than me. Absolutely does know more than me, but maybe able to answer that question better. But as far as I know, that's a bit of a mystery.
We'll need to get a guest and have a three-way
I
conversation
would I would
with
love that. Please,
yeah.
if you can find an octopus expert and invite me on the call, I have
Oh,
questions.
absolutely,
I have
absolutely.
questions. Yeah,
I'm sure we'll get somebody in the comments, and we'll start that up because that, I think they would be excited by talking to somebody who's a dermatologist.
yeah,
And because the skin is again, getting back to the original question, the skin is more than just a wet bag. It's
oh my
not,
god, yeah.
particularly in the case of this octopus, the skin is, um, in some ways directing what's happening in that octopus's experience, and directly affecting its survival.
Hmm.
So you mentioned part of all of this is this overlap of vision and organisms kind of understanding and developing their visual uh, skills and parts. But then that's evolving at the same time as skin. So how do those overlaps, even beyond octopi, how does those overlaps start
Sure.
to change organisms on Earth?
Yeah, I mean, and this is a huge topic of conversation we just waded into here. But immediate things that come to mind, you have things like mimicry. You have, bees that have displays that say like, "Hey, don't come near me, I'll sting you." And then you have harmless flies who have that same display. You have go go watch your bird feeder. Um, those birds are colorful because birds also have eyes. And for reasons that we don't fully understand, uh, mate choice is often directed by what the organisms see on each other's surfaces. And so you get colors that shouldn't belong. You have monkeys, you have mandrills that have blue
Yeah,
on their face,
right.
and mammals can't make blue. It's such a strong connection. The females are so into the idea of blue that the males have evolved a way to line up their collagen bundles in such a way that it refracts blue light in a way that makes them more likely to mate. Why? Hard to say, but there's something about fitness that's encoded into the way light bounces off of organisms. Um, and it's you could see it soup to nuts, top to bottom.
So so getting back to the baboon, it's not the
Mhm.
baboon doesn't make a pigment of blue. The
Nope.
baboon's skin, some baboon way back lucked out, and the way that its skin grew, it it took photons of light in, and the way it bounces them back, they bounce back as blue. And all of a sudden, all the other baboon ladies loved that, and that baboon's now more successful. And so over
Super
time, you
interesting.
start weeding that out, or
Yeah.
not weeding that out, but accelerating that.
Yeah.
So that connection between perception, something we see,
Mhm.
and our physical display is something where the skin kind of has it's our surface. It's the way that that information is conveyed. I guess there are other things that are conveyed like size and strength,
Mhm.
speed. When you get to humans, it's things like knowledge, sense of humor, walks on the beach. But I think that idea that there's this visual cue from just the physical construct of the bag that holds it all in is kind of wild. Are there other examples of that, of how the skin, in ways we may not expect, is conveys information that some other organism picks up visually and says, "Hey, I'm learning something from just the way that that organism looks."
Sure. I mean, you could look both intraspecies and interspecies. So, right now we're having a conversation via computer, but you can watch my eyebrows go up. That tells you
Right.
something.
Right.
That's hardwired. We show each other our teeth when we're like happy, but that means we're actually pulling our skin out of the way to show each other our teeth. And the direction we move our faces communicates all sorts of things. Our faces change color when we're, embarrassed or emotional. Um, we use eyebrows are great to keep sweat out of our face, out of our eyes, but they do so much more than that. So there's that aspect, and then there's interspecies communication. I wrote a piece a little while ago about the blue-tailed skink, or as the five-banded skink, or whatever we decided to call it. But it's got this bright blue tail that it waves, and the idea is when a bird comes towards it and sees it, it's going to strike at the tail because it's flashier, it's easier to see, it's an easier target. Bird grabs the tail, tail falls off, skink runs off and mates and has babies that also have bright blue tails that can also fall off. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what's fascinating to me is there's some things like that that are very obvious. And then there's even the more subtle that, like, when, like, just looking at us, there's two guys with dark hair, beards, and glasses having a conversation. And yet, we can very easily tell each other apart.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine when you get to skinks, we look at a couple skinks, they look exactly the same. The skink is very clear what that other skink, the differences between one and another.
Yeah.
And it's not just size, it's also subtleties of that skin that we're not picking up.
There's an amazing, yeah, when you think of it, you can tell the difference between a cardinal and a peacock very easily. Cardinal's bright red, peacock, crazy tail, right? You line up 15 male peacocks and you have them all put their tail up in the air and do their display. You don't know which one's better.
Right.
You don't know the difference between them, but the female does. The
Right.
peahen does. If you ever watch video of this, you've got this male that's doing this insane display, and then there's a peahen who just kind of glances at it and says, "Nah," and just walks off. And you're like, why isn't she impressed?
Right.
She's not supposed to be impressed. That's the whole reason the display exists is that peahens are hard to impress. They act bored when the males are doing the thing, and we're just amazed. But yeah, we can't tell the difference between them. But you and I are clued into each other like gangbusters because our survival depends on like sharing food with other people.
And it's interesting that, peacocks have become this familiar icon to the point that you see a peacock and you think, "Oh, it's peacock," but when you stop and think, "Oh my god, that's a bird like the cardinal outside," but it's like freaking huge with this massive tail that's as complex as anything I've ever seen in my life. It really it helps you wrap your head around the fact that things that become familiar aren't necessarily unexciting. It's just we've gotten so used to seeing them. When you look at again shape and form, the way that skin has evolved, not only the look of functionality, but the function of functionality. Like, I mean, just again with our beards and our hair, and that the similarity in the mechanism behind that and the mechanism behind scales or the mechanism behind feathers. And I don't know if you've done a lot of research into the or exploration into that, into the ways skin cells can produce a whole wide range, not individually in one organism, but across organisms. You have all this variety in terms of how that a cell expresses itself on the surface of the body. It's not just
Mhm.
that we're all kind of shiny and shimmery and then these other things pop on. It's like those are cells that are just creating a different kind of expression.
Yeah, there are so many functions of skin on just a person, let alone everything else on the planet. But would you? One of the challenges we used to have in our residency program was one of the first questions the pathologist would ask. They'd throw a slide on the microscope deck and say, "What part of the body is that from?" Before we tell whether it's cancer, where did this biopsy come from? And you could say eyelid, ear, arm, chest, foot, hand, all the different body parts, all the different types of skin are so different. You can tell where they came from just by glancing at them under the microscope because they serve such different purposes.
So
Some
even within a body, within a single human,
Mhm.
the cells are so different. It's not even just between a fish scale and a bird feather. It's
It's my nose versus my cheek. Uh, Microscopically different. It's That's how complicated the skin actually is. And then you layer pathology on top of it. You layer, what the hair follicles are doing, what they look like, you know, the different glands, all of that. It feels like infinite complexity, even though I remain contained inside of one body.
Yeah, it is kind of infinite complexity. So then let's dig a little deeper into when the skin goes wrong. I like to be cheerful on all these episodes, but there's um it is kind of wild that this complexity reflects itself not only in things that are part of the normal routine, but when things break or when things are reacting to a situation that's a threat. So, how does skin in humans? Yes, but writ large, how does skin kind of go wrong in its
Mhm.
environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you could build an entire medical specialty around it. Uh,
Yeah.
Really, it's such an infinitely dazzlingly complex organ with so many functions. Each one of those functions can have problems. I mean, you can think about all the different things that can go wrong with your hair. Like I could give you 15 reasons why a hair might fall out because there's
That's
so
scary.
yeah,
In
right. I
itself.
know, I know, I
It's
know.
like, wait,
Like, that makes you think. So, the way that you see dysfunction in the skin, there are all different categories. So you can think about things that have intrinsically changed about the skin itself. You could think about things that change normally as time goes on? How does your collagen change? How does your connective tissue change? How do you age, essentially? All of these different cell types, from your like upper layer skin cells to your basal layer skin cells to all the cells that make collagen, all the hair follicle cells, the sebaceous, your oil glands, your sweat glands, your all these different types of glands have all these different linings and different little stroma, all different cell types. Every last one of them can make a growth.
What's a
And
stroma?
Oh, stroma. So like the stroma is the space in between spaces, basically.
Okay.
The you've got your cells and then you got the crap around the cells, that kind of stuff. Um, but you any type of cell in the skin can make a growth, and they all have names. And some of those growths are not dangerous, and some of those growths are dangerous. Another thing that we really spend a lot of time on in the skin is the immune system, because the skin, number one, barrier. Number two, immune system function. The skin is designed to fend stuff off that doesn't belong. And there are lots of different cells that can do that. When you see a rash on the skin, like if I see like ringworm, for example, if I got a little, circle of a fungal infection, I'm not looking at the fungus. I'm looking at the rash my body makes in response to the fungus. And so when I'm looking at any rash, I'm looking at immune system function. Sometimes the immune system is functioning appropriately. It's trying to fight off the fungus. It's trying to fight off the bacteria. If I have a boil on my forehead from a bacterial infection, that's my immune system doing its job. Every once in a while, the immune system gets turned on in ways we don't want it to. You bump into poison ivy and your skin overreacts to it. Or you wash your hands too many times and you get an eczema reaction on your hands because all of a sudden your soap's getting in there, doesn't belong there, and then your immune system complains about it. And sometimes we're just born to have some of these issues. People with things like psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, and a whole host of other rashes have inborn issues or predispositions for issues with their immune system that present on the skin. And that's how I feed my family, is thinking about that stuff.
Right, but it's also well, and you know this, that I have atopic dermatitis slash eczema, and trying to, it's like many health issues, particularly ones we talk about when you get to a certain age, where everybody talks about the term all the time, but you don't realize how horrible it is until you're experiencing it. And like with the eczema, it's like, you're flaking off and oozing and all this horrible stuff. Um, and uncomfortable, and it's the immune system overreacting. But with
Mhm,
the medication I'm on is Dupixent,
mhm,
and it shuts down a very specific immune process. It
mhm,
leaves the others alone, and it was what attracted me to that particular treatment, because there were some treatments like tacrolimus where it sort of shut down enough things that I was worried it would open up other issues, like, risk for cancer and that sort of stuff. It's like, well, give me something else to worry about. But with the Dupixent, it seems fairly focused on this one pathway. Maybe you can talk about this immune system element of our skin, like how it's part of the immune system. What are the different weapons that the skin has? What is going wrong when I get some sort of reaction of eczema or whatever it is? And then
mhm.
how is something like a Dupixent plug in the hole? Because to me, that's sophisticated understanding of how our immune system works is at a whole other tier than I think humanity's really had before, where we really can fine tune these processes that you don't learn about in high school biology.
It's amazing what we've figured out in the last like 15, 20 years about the immune system. I mean, you watch any TV show, you'll see two car commercials and three commercials for either a psoriasis or an eczema biologic. And it's
Yeah.
because we've really started to understand the biochemical pathways that lead to these types of skin diseases. Um, I'll, I guess, yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about how atopic dermatitis works and why blocking the precursor to IL-4, IL-13 is so effective. Um, Atopic dermatitis is interesting because it's a chicken or the egg kind of thing. You put a room full of dermatologists in a room together, get a bunch of them in a room together, and they'll start arguing about like, is this a skin barrier problem or is this an immune system problem? You got all these people saying, well, it's a skin barrier problem. Your skin's dry. That leads to irritants and allergens getting into the skin and causes immune system overreactivity. And then you've got another group of people saying, well, no, no, the immune system is activated to begin with, and that leads to barrier dysfunction, which then allows all the other things. But really, I always say if you get a room full of very smart people and they start yelling at each other, either they're both right or nobody knows what they're talking about. And I think it's a little bit of them both being right.
Yeah.
Turns out atopic dermatitis, fundamentally, it seems that there's some kind of barrier dysfunction. There's a gene called filaggrin that if it's not fully functioning, you're born with a gazillion little tiny cracks in your skin. Those cracks let moisture out. It makes your skin dry, even more cracked, but it also lets the outside world in. The immune system hates the outside world, freaks out, complains, boom, you get a rash. Over time, with constant irritability that way, the immune system seems to kind of learn to be active all the time. And so you don't necessarily need an irritant, you don't need an allergen for somebody with atopic dermatitis to be making that rash all the time. And sometimes it's just an ongoing thing. You can become allergic and sensitive to all these different things. One of the fascinating
And
things, go ahead. Yeah.
what is the immune system functionally doing, not
Hmm.
just with atopic dermatitis, but what is that swath of tools the immune system has that are
Hmm.
expressing themselves as rashes and other things?
So in that particular case, it's an overreactivity of a type of I'm about to get jargony at you. I'm really sorry, but a branch of the adaptive immune system called a Th2 response, and it has to do with it's actually the same mechanism that gives you like allergy to things like nickel or to poison ivy, whatever it is. It's that kind of branch of the immune system. It's trying to fight off foreign invaders, and
So is
that's
it like a white blood cell doing
yeah.
something? Okay.
Yeah, it's a type of it's a type of coordinated white blood cell response, that is being misapplied in the wrong situations. What Dupixent does is it blunts that branch of the immune system that leads to the rash in the first place. But the fascinating thing is that it doesn't actually fix your filaggrin mutation in the first place. And so sometimes you have folks who have very severe atopic dermatitis, you give them Dupixent, they get better. They come in, they have no rash, no itch for the first time in their lives. They feel great. And they're so happy that they stop using their moisturizer, and so they stop treating their underlying filaggrin mutation. They come in dry as a bone. And you're like desperate, like, please wear some moisturizer. And they're like, I'm not itchy. I don't need my moisturizer. This is great. And it really helps you see the difference. It helps you separate out like the barrier from the immune system function when you're thinking about atopic dermatitis.
But I still want to dig deeper into the immune system itself because the
Sure.
immune system, you've got white blood cells doing what they do, you've got T
Hmm.
cells.
Yeah.
Dive into that a little bit in the sense of the different characters in this story because
Yeah.
we don't think about skin as anything more than a barrier, but the skin, the cells within the skin, in the blood of the skin, and so
Yeah.
on. And this is where my knowledge ends and yours is going to share it for me.
Hmm.
Um, those different immune functions, what are some of those characters? How do they
Yeah.
actually work? Like what they
Sure.
throw a certain molecule out that then destroys the foreigner, or do they bundle something up and carry it away? Or what are those things that are happening? Because those are all happening in this outer layer before it
Yeah.
can get into affect a lung or a heart or whatever else it might be, right?
Yes, exactly. You just asked me a 4-hour question, but
I
yes,
know, and that
I'll do my best.
I'm nervous about that, but there's to me, I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by the fact that the skin has these tools that it can
Yeah.
use, that the immune function of our body are these very specific cells doing certain
Yeah.
things and being affected by very specific molecules, because understanding that is helping the layperson understand how complex these medical treatments are. That it's not
Yeah.
just you inject yourself with, vitamin C and all of a sudden you're better. There's like this cascade of molecular things that has to happen, which is also why you get all these side effects from things.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the best way to do it is to honestly because there are so many branches of the immune system,
Yep.
rather than listing them, I think I'm just gonna tell you what happens if you get a cut. And it really gives a not a full soup to nuts, but it's going to help. So like when your skin gets broken, the top layer of your epidermis, there are skin cells in there. They're called keratinocytes. They're the basic skin cell. Once they get broken open, they release some of their contents. Some of their DNA gets spilled out, proteins get spilled out, and preformed like alarm bell molecules get dumped into the surrounding area. That triggers other cells to react to that. The other cells what say, "Whoa, shit! I mean, oh crap! There's damage up there. We got to do something." And so for example, mast cells that are like these little landmines explode and release histamine, which increases vascular permeability. So like fluid starts coming out of your blood cells. It makes you itchy, so it brings your attention over to what's going on. It signals, "Hey, brain, you should probably take a look over here." Um, and it activates the inside of the blood vessels and makes them stickier. So then this other branch of the immune system, the innate immune system, can become activated. That's your neutrophils. Those are your cells that make pus. And so they're circulating through your blood all the time, and they're kind of like crawling around along the edge of your blood vessels. And when a blood vessel gets activated, it gets stickier. And so it gets caught like Velcro. And when that happens, it goes into the skin and starts looking for trouble. And if it finds something it doesn't like, it just explodes itself and its contents come out. That's what pus is. Pus is when neutrophils, so many of them do that and kill so many bacteria, there's just junk left over. And then you squeeze it and it comes out. But that's just the beginning of the innate immune system. Then you've got these cells called macrophages that come in, and they almost look like little amoebas or something. They come in and they start gobbling things up as well. But at the same time, little bits of what's going on in the skin get pulled into these things called antigen presenting cells that chop them up and then just like drive up to your lymph node. They like physically go up into your lymph nodes and let the big central immune system know, like, "Hey, something's going on. You should take a look at this." And it actually shows all these little chopped up bits of the bacteria or the chopped up little bits of the virus or whatever it is, shows them to your central immune system, which then can react if you've never seen it before. If your immune system says, "Hey, what's this?" It can build a new response. Or if it has seen it before, like say through a vaccine or through a prior infection, it says, "Hey, I know what this is." And then it sends the troops right away. Or it builds an immune response and then sends the troops a couple days later, whatever the case is. And depending on whether it's a virus that's infecting the inside of cells, or it's a bacteria that somehow got into the skin, or it's just a cut itself, your immune system sends more troops that get, again, stuck on the Velcro, and they go up into the skin and fight off whatever the thing is. Meanwhile, there's a hole in your skin. So then you got to fill it. And that's where clotting comes into play. That's where all of this connective tissue that's deeper down and your fibroblasts and your dermis and the collagen producing stuff gets activated and starts building new stuff to fill in the gaps, builds new blood vessels to bring in food to do the process in the first place. And then skin cells start crawling in from the outside to physically fill in the gap and then re-epithelialize the entire thing. It's this like incredibly long and complex story with branch after branch after branch, depending
And
on.
that's from a single cut in your skin.
Yeah, if you like scratch a bug bite too hard, this all happens. It's just like you barely have to, you make a little nick. All of these things take place every time you get a little tiny cut. But every single step in this process can go wrong. And it can lead to a different type of rash, a different type of morphology, and a different thing that you need to treat.
And that complexity, that was beautiful. Thank you. That complexity is what I was getting at. That there's, we tend to think of our bodies in terms of, you cut yourself, the cells come to the rescue, they patch it up and move on. And at every stage of what you described, beautifully without jargon, which was great,
Mhm.
there are molecules doing things. There's so many things at so many scales that just add to that complexity of what you described. And that's another reason why these medications are so wild, as well as, why the side effects can be so weird depending. Like one of the things I like about the Dupixent is it seems to be very much focused on a single. So go ahead and describe what interleukin is as we
Mm,
go, but it seems to be focused on a very specific molecule. And one of the things that I appreciated my dermatologist telling me about was that it's the molecule that's part of this cascade of information sharing when these things go wrong, that it's attacking the molecule. It's not affecting the cells of the immune system themselves. It's not
yeah,
preventing the cells of the immune system from doing their job. It's preventing one of the pieces of one of those pathways from doing its job, and so it's not causing as many problems as
Mhm.
another heavy-handed type of approach might work.
That's exactly it. So, for all of the things that can go wrong with the immune system in the skin, for most conditions, the answer is topical steroids. Um, in part because when humans get money to study disease, they don't think as much about itchy red bumps. We think about things like heart attack, stroke, cancer, those sorts of things. And so our tool set up until recently has been incredibly limited and very much basically kicking the legs out from underneath the immune system. You know, you get a rash, you throw some steroid on there to make the immune system stop reacting. The biggest risk of doing that straight away as a first choice is like, well, if it's an infection, then you're like going to, stop you from fighting the infection. But for most rashes, it works really well until it doesn't. And so these newer monoclonal antibodies are really good. And what we're really trying to do is find like the last couple steps in the biochemical pathway that lead to the rash in the first place. You don't want to knock the base off the pyramid. You want to take the cap off the top. And as time goes on, we get better and better at finding those last steps. And that's one of the big benefits of Dupixent is that we're farther down that road. We're closer to the apex of the pyramid when we remove that little piece. It's not quite the tippity top, but it's close enough that we get a lot of benefit without necessarily increasing risk as much as we used to with these other heavy duty medications.
And I want to talk about risk in the immune system in a second because another exciting area of research is with cancer and taking advantage of the immune system as opposed
Yeah.
to doing things that help shut it down. But before I get to that, one of the things that's really interesting about this particular pathway is it's not this gets at the fact that these molecules aren't making decisions, these cells aren't making decisions. So much of this is random because that same pathway is executed when a microbe gets in my body. Like and that pathway is what kills like a toxic amoeba that might be attacking me. And so there's a higher risk that I have to be careful about, when I'm around certain environments, like when I clean the cat litter or whatever it might be, because my body it doesn't have that mechanism because it's the same exact mechanism that it would otherwise be using to attack rash issues in my skin is the
Yeah.
one that it would use to defend against the amoeba. And the fact that there's that overlap, I mean, it's like the pheromones with the elephant and the moth again. It's like the same molecule from the same system in the same cells in the same body doing two totally different things, responding to two
Yeah.
totally different threats.
Exactly. I mean, that's a great example are what are called type 2 hypersensitivity reactions. That's a great way to think of this is that is when the antibody part of the immune system, the stuff that makes antibodies, accidentally recognizes part of you as a foreign invader. It recognizes part of you. So there's a condition called bullous pemphigoid where uh, you make antibodies that attack the bottom layer of your skin, and it causes these big blisters. It's a very uncomfortable condition to have. It's a really tough one to have, but your immune system just lost its ability to tell the difference between like, hey, this is a piece of your basement membrane, and hey, this is a piece of a bacteria. It's following its own algorithm, and it in like one little step along the way, it just gets a little tweak and it gets confused for a half a second, and then you make this antibody, and that's just something you can do now. And in most cases, that's great. You bump into a bacteria, you make the antibody, and you could do that forever, and you can fight off that bacteria forever. But you don't want to fight off your own skin forever. Um, but the immune system isn't choosing. There's no consciousness behind it. It's following an algorithmic pattern um, where these responses emerge in a way that keeps us safe until they don't.
How do you treat that condition?
Dupixent, actually.
Oh, is that right? So
Yeah,
it's the
it just
same.
got it. It just got an approval. for bullous
So the immune
pemphigoid.
system is attacking that base layer the same way it attacks things in my skin, the
It
same way it
it
attacks.
uses yeah, so towards the end, there's a similar pattern. For a long time, there have been a lot of attempts to treat bullous pemphigoid. You can use oral steroids. You can use a medicine called mycophenolate mofetil. For some reason, an antibiotic called doxycycline can help.
Oh,
There is an infusion called rituximab that helps downregulate B cell. They're all different ways that we've tried to get bullous pemphigoid under control. But recently, yeah, we've been able to use Dupixent for that condition as well.
so this brings me to the cancer question with treatments in the immune system, because when I did a little bit of medical writing, it was fascinating to me how there seems to be so much progress happening right now in helping the immune system do what it does, and
Mhm,
not doing things like chemotherapy that might end up weakening the immune system, but keeping the immune system not only functional but training it
mhm.
so that it can attack the very specific cells of the very specific cancer that you might have, and then ramping that up. And one of the things that it seems is getting a slow start is finding ways, and this gets to the economics of it, which hopefully people will soon resolve, but that instead of starting people with these alternative treatments that don't hurt the immune system but actually boost the immune system, people tend to have to go through all these other chemotherapies and other things first.
Yeah.
Um, and then so they're starting with kind of one hand tied behind their back when they get this new treatment that does work with the immune system to help. So can you talk a little bit about how with cancer that how the immune system is still functioning to attack the cancer? It's not that the immune system can attack the cancer, just that it needs a little help. And that how these new drugs and new approaches that work with the immune system are a different way of looking at treating this disease that everybody's terrified of.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and there's been a bit of a revolution in cancer care. You're right. Over the last, God, when did I graduate medical school? Last 10, 12 years or so, with these new immunotherapies. And the first and most important class are the PD-1s and the PDL-1s. That
Which stands
basically
for
oh God, yeah, I don't even remember. But blah one ligand. The L's
right.
ligand. The L is ligand. You're asking me oncology questions. But the idea is it takes the brakes off the immune system. So one of the great things about that medicine is that it helps the immune system notice the cancer as non-self, and helps the immune system attack this cancer and this tumor that doesn't actually belong, even though it's made out of you. And that's the nuanced problem here, is that cancer is when some part of your body or some cell in your body has decided it has its own, not decided, but it starts evolving within the milieu of your own body, and it starts finding ways to survive and make new copies of itself despite the regulatory attempts of your body. And so it's made out of you, but it's not fully you anymore. It has its own propagation priorities. Of course, it doesn't have consciousness, and it doesn't
Well, I
know
was
that
gonna say, so
yeah, it
yeah,
doesn't,
it's
and
not making the decision to, but accidentally something
exactly.
breaks and yeah.
It basically starts undergoing Darwinian evolution within your body. And
Yeah.
it has no way of understanding that if you die, it dies too. It's just finding a way to make new copies of itself in the world it finds itself, which is like happens to be your lung or something, which is like tragic and horrible. But that's what's biologically happening. And those medicines help your immune system say, like, hey, this thing doesn't belong here. The trouble is, what you're really doing with these medicines is inducing an autoimmune disease, uh, that is specific to the cancer that you're trying to treat. But what ends up happening is you end up developing rashes and other, autoimmune conditions throughout your body as a side effect of taking the brakes off the immune system. What we're dealing with the immune system, it's a constant give and take. You want it to react, but you don't want it to react too much, and you don't want it to react to the wrong things. And so you're kind of like walking this tightrope with the immune system at all times. And these new cancer therapies are just like nudging a little bit to one side, and they've made a huge difference.
And then there's a whole other level where they're specifically training cells and to attack the
Mm,
specific molecules on the cancer cells themselves,
yeah.
and growing them in the laboratory and then reinfusing the trained cells so that instead of just taking the brakes off of the immune system, it's giving it's adding soldiers to the fight.
Hmm.
And those are really exciting too because they seem to have even fewer side effects by and large, because instead of just allowing the immune system to have a stronger response, it's allowing the immune system to bring in allies and have a more focused response. And that's even like CAR T and some of these things that are even, younger, but really seem to be kind of getting us on a path towards, if we can get that knowledge that we seem to be getting towards, of really understanding these things at these scales, in these time scales, in these ways, that we can fine tune these systems to really, be the silver bullets that they need to be. Although they're not silver bullets, they're silver massive machination battlefield strategies, because there
Yeah.
is complexity to all of it. That is really cool. So let me take a wide divergence, because one of the things that drew me to your columns was not just the skin and cells and evolution, but that you've been applying it to understanding life writ large and what that means here and anywhere else. And
Yes.
so how did you, first of all, talk a little bit about that approach that you have of looking at life in this very broad way? And then how did you get on that path, which, as somebody who's a science fiction person, like
Hmm.
that's kind of where I live. How did you get there?
Sure. Yeah. Uh, I don't know how I actually landed on it other than just like my random interest in it. But what I find so fascinating about it is that like water is water wherever you are. And so a body moving through water is going to be hydrodynamic one way or the other. And so it doesn't necessarily matter whether you're a dolphin and started out as a mammal, if you're an ichthyosaur and started out as a reptile, or if you're a shark and started out as a fish, a body moving through water is going to be a body moving through water. If there's water on another planet and there are bodies moving through it, something like a fish or a dolphin or an ichthyosaur may be swimming there. There are only so many solutions to the physical problems that exist in the universe, but there are infinite pathways to get there. And I think the tension between those two things is what's really interesting to me. The difference between convergence, which is this, kind of a gravity well of evolution to say plants plants grow tall because they're closer to the sun, they get more energy. Or, there are only so many ways that you can generate lift in order to do flight. Those are your gravity wells that will often dictate form and dictate like the physical relationship between the organism and the outside world. But then there are these different pathways. A dolphin is not a fish. um, they're incredibly different in their histories. And when you start dissecting those animals, you start looking at their body parts, you look at their physiology, and you look at how they got where they're going. You could run the tape, as they used to say. Uh, you could run the tape a million different ways, different times, and you'll get a million different results. You'll get different life, but something's going to be shaped like a dolphin.
So when you think about skin in the context of an appearance
Hmm.
and display and all of those things in the context of those physical constraints that exist in the universe, the physics of the universe, um, where does it lead your mind to go? Like what do you expect to see in terms of the how these other organisms look, or how their skins function, or what their scales, feathers, or otherwise might be?
Sure. Well, you're going to see giraffes for one. I'm pretty certain of that. But you're going to see if you're on a rocky gaseous planet, and there's some evolutionary incentive to be on the land, you're going to see most likely organisms with some kind of cuticle that prevents evaporation. Um, it's likely to be some, I mean, I don't know if they're gonna be made out of cells, if they're gonna be one large cell, whatever it is, but there's gonna be an outer rind that prevents desiccation if you're on an aqueous planet. There are just certain constraints that are going to be universal. You know, put a fish in the desert, it's not going to last very long. It needs to have an external barrier. It needs to have a way to prevent desiccation, thermoregulation, you know, some other version of gas exchange that's probably not the skin. There's going to have to be a version of a lung or some other spicule that's on an arthropod or whatever it is. Um, but these same problems are going to need to be solved no matter what planet you're on. And when you look at it under the microscope, you may see something similar.
And why giraffes?
Because they're so immediately recognizable. It's a great lens because if you look at a giraffe and you're like, "That's a giraffe," and I wanted to pick an organism that if you, like, got off a spaceship on another planet, you'd look at the thing and be like, "Oh, they've got giraffes here." And it's such a charismatic animal and such a what feels like unique and a one-off animal that really looking at, like, are these things inevitable? Are these things gonna show up on other planets? Becomes an interesting question. And if you look back on our own planet, giraffes aren't giraffes. Giraffes are sauropods. The real question is, like, are there sauropods on other planets? Because those were the original giraffes. The idea is if you're on a rocky planet, you've got plants that have an incentive to be closer to the source of radiation. Even if you have higher gravity, the plants that are taller are going to get more radiation. If you have lower gravity, wind, whatever it is, it's a selective pressure. There are only so many ways to get to the like calories that are up there. You can climb, you can fly, or you can reach. Um, if you've got tall plants someplace, you probably have something that reaches. And that's really where my interest comes in is like how hard is it to get to a giraffe? What things need to be true to get to a giraffe? You got to get blood up there. That's hard. Is that the limiting factor? You have to have gas exchange. You know, is that the limiting factor? You have to have an internal skeleton to be able to scale to that kind of height. Is that the limiting factor? Is it multicellularity? Is it mitochondria? Like where do the filters lie, and are there filters? Those are really interesting questions for me to think about.
So what are some of the questions you're looking at now that you wanna answer as you keep writing these columns?
Sure. Um, one of the deeper underlying things is I like thinking about the interaction between contingency and convergence. So we talked a minute ago about all the different ways to get to a certain body plan, a dolphin body plan. Um, the question is, are giraffes contingent or is this a convergent idea? I really like thinking about internal locomotion. And so we have an internal spinal cord and bilateral symmetry with these bones that allow us to move through space. But we also have a high pressure circulatory system that allows us to have gas exchange. Those feel like they're coupled in some way, but they're so distantly separated from one another. Vertebrates developed internal skeletons way back in the like Cambrian, early Cambrian. Um, and then our high pressure cardiovascular system happened a while later than that. The way to get blood all the way up there, you cut something's head off and the blood spurts, right? It's high pressure. Um, but then the lung system that's attached to it was like several 100 million years later. And so this system that feels continuous actually isn't. And they happen separately. And I like thinking about like, well, why was the order that way? And can you have something that has a backbone but doesn't have a high pressure system? And is that the norm, or what are we actually looking at here? These little branch points, I think, are the interesting places for me.
That's cool. I mean, I think, one of the things that artificial intelligence will help with, there's so much, hype and misinformation about artificial intelligence. Um, but one of the things that I think it will definitely help with is taking all of these factors and helping us wrap our heads around them and
Mhm.
figuring out, this is the lung piece, this is the blood pressure piece, this is the skin piece, this is the bone piece. not only understanding a little bit more about what we see in the historic record of those things evolving, but what it means in terms of body plans and constructs, and the potential and the limits. And you go to a planet with more gravity, you're going to see this. You go to a planet with more radiation, you're going to see that. You go to a planet with this chemical atmosphere, you're going to see this. And moving those different pieces around and wrapping our heads around how to move those different pieces around. I'm excited about that. I think
Yeah.
it's that idea that we can get a handle on these what seems like nearly infinite things, and then use that to allow our imagination to think about, okay, well, if I do go to Alpha Centauri and there's a planet around it that looks like this, what's going to be there? And as a creative, that's kind of the gold standard. Even without any sort of artificial intelligence, machine learning guidance, just knowing more of these factors and pieces, it's fun. It's fun to think about.
Oh,
So
it's amazing. It's amazing to think about on a micro scale, a macro scale, and then like a hyper macro scale at the same time. I bumped into an idea. It was in Riley Black's When the World Was Green. I just finished that book yesterday. It's excellent. Uh, but there's this idea that like plants are the reason why we're able to have bones because calcium was bound up in rocks until plants were able to like free it from the minerals themselves and give
yeah.
us access to these elements that were there all along. It's really like you're like a planet is born with like raw ingredients and you bake it in front of a star for long enough and like more and more complex things start spilling out of it that can be recombined in different ways. We couldn't have skeletons at first because plants hadn't figured out how to mobilize calcium from the rock yet, and it's just like, oh my god, this is so interconnected. And to think about the way that the role that oxygen has played with life on Earth, and really I've been thinking a lot lately about planets as starting conditions, like these just a big ball of ingredients. And what could spill out of it is really, I mean, it could be a ratio game. It could be something that's convergent. There could be a gazillion different ways to have a rocky planet like ours. And different elements and different ratios might yield vastly different forms. It's fascinating.
And then as the things evolve, I mean, if it developed lungs before the blood pressure, or if it developed, something else, things that we can't even conceive of, that it's like, oh, that was interesting, that's what happened there that didn't happen here, or the calcium was available right from the start, or whatever it might be. I mean, it really does boggle the mind. This has been fascinating. I think we've opened up kind of another 15 potential conversations, and so we'll get to those. I'll keep following your Substack. You're going to keep following mine, and
Yeah.
I think that the hope is that we'll also get some questions from folks that we can then bring in. And I think we're going to also try to get a octopus specialist to show
Oh,
up.
please do.
We can
Please
just pick
do.
their brain. But really, Kevin, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for carving out the time for me today. I uh, I think as we do these kinds of communications with audiences, we start thinking about, every audience is bringing something different to the table. And what I hope to keep doing in our conversations and in our pieces is helping the audience navigate all of this information in a way that helps them feel inspired by what they see and not overwhelmed by it. And I think
Yeah.
you did that today. You kind of helped me digest a few things, and I appreciate it. It
Great.
was great talk. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.